For those of you that don't know me, I'm Owen Hewlett. I'm the Chief Technical Officer here at Gold Standard, and I'm going to present a kind of introductory briefing on the new standard, Gold Standard for the Global Goals, this morning for around 15-20 minutes before we open up for some questions and answers from you guys. So I'll just open the right PowerPoint presentation would be a good start. So bear with me 1 second. Right, here we go. So yes, I'll talk for something around 15 to 20 minutes on the structure and direction of Gold Standard for the Global Goals, and I'll update you a little bit on some of the initiatives that will be coming forward to further enhance GS for the Global Goals in the coming months and year as well. So firstly, thanks everybody for attending, and thanks to those that have joined multiple sessions. And there's several names on the attendees list here that have participated in various targeted consultations, public consultations, working groups, TAC. So I'm delighted to see so many contributors to the new standard here. Thank you so much. We really couldn't have done it without you. So I'm going to speak for 15 to 20 minutes. I would just like to say actually that with all of the webinars that we're hosting over this week and indeed last week, if you go, hopefully you can see this, if you go to the Gold Standard YouTube channel, which I've got open on my screen here, you can see here the various uploads from the last couple of weeks. So for example, there's a renewable energy product label Q&A session there. We have the recorded sessions from our webinars with the audit community as well from last week. We are running 4 sessions for project developers this week, 2 today for more energy focused project developers and 2 on Thursday for more land use focused project developers, and we'll upload all of those webinars to the Gold Standard YouTube channel, and we'll also circulate the links to that to the attendees after the call. So no need to take down the URL there or anything like that. In terms of housekeeping for today, if you look at your dashboard for the GoToWebinar, you should be able to see a questions section there. These webinars tend to operate best when people drop their written questions into that function, and then I'll work through them after the webinar. So if you drop them in there during the webinar or afterwards, then I'll address and try and respond to those questions, and anything I can't answer today, obviously I'll take away to deal with afterwards. What I would ask is if you do put a question in the box, please try and avoid shorthand. It's just a little bit difficult to interpret otherwise. And also if there's a question related to a specific slide, then please do note that slide down in the question, and I'll come back to the slide to answer it. We are going to circulate a schedule of the questions raised as well. So the questions raised across all 6 webinars will be scheduled out and circulated to everybody, so you can see what others have asked, and our answers will obviously be made consistent then, so that you guys can have some confidence in how we're responding to the questions. You may also have seen there's an FAQs page on the website, and I'll come on to where to find that in a second, but that'll also be updated with the questions we're receiving. If you don't want to raise a question today, or you think of something afterwards, or there's something you're not sure if you should ask here or in another forum, or it's confidential, or you have a concern, then you can reach us on help@goldstandard.org as well. That's somewhere where we're recording all questions to make sure that we're responding quickly and consistently to everybody. So feel free, if you want to keep your question anonymous, then please do reach out to us using help@goldstandard.org. And many of you know me as well, of course. My door is always open if you want to reach out to me directly. So with that, I'll dive right into the presentation. Before I go into any introductory details, I just want to take a moment to kind of thank some of our strategic partners and to show off a little really some of the names that we've been entering into strategic partnerships with. I think this slide speaks for itself in terms of the credibility these partners are adding to Gold Standard. We've worked intentionally very hard to bring some of the biggest, most credible names and brands to the table with Gold Standard for the Global Goals. We really see that as a way of adding credibility to Gold Standard, to the Gold Standard for the Global Goals, and give confidence to the markets that we operate in. One that we're especially excited about there, of course, is our collaboration with the UNFCCC, which is the first of its kind and the only partnership that the UNFCCC are entering into in that respect. We're also working closely with colleagues over at CDP, who many of you will know. And obviously, if we can get a little bit closer to the likes of CDP and WWF with science-based targets, and have our certification recognized in some of the scoring there, then clearly a whole new market of corporate buyers opens up for us, which is exciting. So I won't dwell too much on that, other than to say these are all, excuse me, these are all very close partners now of Gold Standard, and we're really excited to be working with them all. This presentation is kind of in two parts. It's a shortened version of what can be found on the YouTube channel I just pointed to. So if you want to see the full version, which has more generic background and introductory details, a bit of the history of the Gold Standard, then you can go to the YouTube channel and see that. I'm trying to keep it relatively tight this morning for this audience who obviously know us a little better. But I'm going to speak to two things really. The first is to give an introductory update on what's in the standard and what's changed at a high level. And secondly, to talk through some of the strategic next steps and how we're building demand and improving service, so that you guys can see the general direction of travel coming up. There will also be later on in August, so early first week in August, there's going to be a more detailed training session for Gold Standard for the Global Goals that will be recorded and made available to you all if you can't join. I would say that's really a really good place to find out some of the more detailed technical nuance, which I won't go into so much today, other than at the high level. So if you have some more specific, detailed technical questions, then like I say, either join that or reach out to us at help@goldstandard.org if I don't dive into enough detail today. So Gold Standard for the Global Goals was originally intended actually as with a kind of fairly humble aspiration to unify Gold Standard under one standard banner. So those of you that know us well across multiple activity types will know that we have several versions of the energy standard in operation. We have land use and forest, so agriculture and forestry standards, and more recently the water benefits standard. And so what we wanted to do was to really take those multiple standards and unify them under one banner. And I'll come back to that later on in terms of how everybody will transition to Gold Standard for the Global Goals. But what we did was to take the key elements that were consistent across all of those standards and break them up into modules to make it a little more flexible and a little more legible than it has been previously. And what you're seeing on the screen here really is the four key modules that our project developers will recognize that were formerly part of the standards that you will have been using historically, but have been broken up a little bit into separate sections to give you that kind of flexibility and optionality. So the two green boxes on the left, the core principles and requirements and specific activity requirements, are mandatory to all project types. I'll come on to what those contain in a minute, but it's kind of the classic Gold Standard, really, the safeguards, the stakeholder, and some of the activity-specific stuff. So, for example, if you're a large hydro project developer, you'll know that we have some very specific requirements around large hydro that have been maintained. So those are mandatory to all project developers. And if there are activity requirements available, then you should apply those as well. And then the blue boxes on the right are optional, really. So methodologies such as emission reductions, water benefits, A-dailies in health that some of you will have seen more recently, and the products. So the guidelines that are applicable if you want to issue carbon credits or renewable energy certificate labels, for example, that's where those live. And the astute amongst you will already have picked up there that if the boxes on the left are mandatory and the boxes on the right are optional, then for the first time that means Gold Standard can certify the project but doesn't assume that you want to follow a methodology or indeed issue carbon credits. There's more of a demand for that than I think even we expected. So people just seeking project-only certification. So for example, it might be if somebody wanting to do it for due diligence purposes or to have it for their M&E purposes, for example. So for the first time, as I say, you can certify just as a project without being compelled to follow particular methodologies or issue carbon credits or water benefit certificates, etc., which is a useful new service. Before I carry on there, I'll just show you quickly the microsite in case you've not seen it. So with the new standard, just open this up. So with the new standard, we wanted to, sorry, excuse me one moment. Here we go. So one of the things we wanted to address with the new standard was legibility, and we recognise that previous versions of Gold Standard are somewhat hard to follow around the website. So we've created a microsite specifically for Gold Standard for the global goals. If you've not seen that already, I'd encourage you to take a look at it. You can go to our website, and under the Our Standard banner there at the top, Standard Documents, that's where you'll find the microsite. And we'll be recirculating the link in the communication after this call. The microsite includes the standards documents, and I'll come back to those in a second, but it also includes some useful information such as support and FAQs. So you'll see there, as I mentioned earlier, that's where we'll post some of the Q&A that we receive from these webinars. The fee schedule is included there on the left-hand side, as well as some new terms and conditions, along with the glossary as well. So some useful support documents there. Under the standard documents, really reflecting that modular structure I just mentioned, you can find the principles and requirements. So these are the core requirements to everybody. You can find some of the activity-specific requirements. So here we have specific requirements for community projects, for renewable energy projects, and for land use and forest projects. And then you can also find the impact methodologies. So all of the methodologies that you will know if you've been using them have been carried across. There's all the emission reduction methodologies. And lastly, you'll find the product requirements. So under here, you'll find for now the requirements that apply if you want to issue carbon credits. Now, not a huge amount has changed in those. Really, it's been a case of unifying land use and energy and capturing that in its own more concise document. So really not many rule changes there. There's a few specific ones which I'll come on to, but generally the rules and requirements for the issuance of carbon credits haven't changed a huge amount. So that's where you can find the standard. It's worth exploring around that microsite. And if you can't find a document or you're wondering what happened to a rule, then, like I say, do reach out to us at help@goldstandard.org. So I'll come on to some further details on what's in each module. So just briefly, I mentioned earlier that the two mandatory modules, they really reflect classic gold standards. So when we analysed the different standards across the foundation, it was pretty quick to recognise that things like contribution to sustainable development, strong safeguards, strong stakeholder inclusivity were all really kind of what core gold standard is. And we really wanted to bring those to a consistency and have them applied to all projects. So within the principles and requirements, there are 5 core principles. There's a principle that you have to contribute to climate security and the sustainable development goals. There's a principle that replaces the previous do no harm assessment and sustainability assessment in land use that speaks to some of the safeguards that apply. There's an update to the stakeholder consultation requirements. Principle 4 is really around demonstrating real impact, and that's where the certification cycle and audit requirements apply. And then finally, Principle 5 is where we apply additionality and ongoing financial need, which is a new concept that I'll come on to. Principle 5 is a little bit unusual in that it only applies where you're looking for gold standard products. So I mentioned earlier that you can now certify just as a gold standard project. We don't assume that that kind of certification pathway requires proof of additionality. But if you're seeking carbon credits or water benefit certificates, then we still require that. And then the optional elements, just to give you an idea of what's in those, really the carbon credit methodologies are all carried over. There's no need for you to trawl through those methodologies to see if they're the same as previous versions. I can confirm that we haven't changed the methodologies other than the branding to make sure they fit on the microsite. There's some new SDG methodologies available. Those that have been monitoring closely will already have seen our black carbon and a dailies methodologies. Later this year, agenda framework will be released as well. And if you're interested and you're part of the renewable energy developer community, then you'll shortly see in the product requirements the requirements for the gold standard labeling of renewable energy certificates. And I'll come on to that in a minute. This is a slightly busy side, but it really just kind of gives some of the examples of how those modules fit together for some of the classic activity types. So as I say, working left to right, all projects apply the principles and requirements. And then where they exist, you'll also apply activity requirements specific to the project type. Where they don't exist, then the core principle and requirements sort of act as default. So for example, some of our shipping projects, there's no shipping activity requirements. And so the principles and requirements are used as a default there. So just to give an example, really from the energy side, cook stoves, wash projects, biodigesters, etc., all fall under the community service activity requirements. So you would apply those, and then the methodologies available to you will be emissions reduction methodologies, dailies methodologies. I've not shown it here, but also black carbon later this year, gender as well. And that will allow you to issue emissions reduction emission reduction carbon credits or dailies. And for the first time, projects can choose to stack those as well. So if you want to issue both emissions reductions and dailies, that's feasible under the new standard. There are a few exceptions to what can be stacked. We won't stack black carbon and dailies. We won't stack renewable energy certificate labels and carbon credits for the same megawatt hour. So in a few cases, there are some restrictions on stacking, and we can point you to those if you need. If you're a renewable energy project, so a grid-connected renewable energy generator, then the renewable energy emission reduction methodologies are still available to you, as are carbon credits. But we'll also be introducing for the first time the possibility to label IREX. So those of you that play in the IREX market, there's a new product on its way, which will publish in mid-August, that allows you to label those. There's no methodology for that because IREX doesn't require a methodology. It's a straightforward issuance of megawatt hours, basically. So in terms of the certification cycle, there's some changes here to terminology and timelines, but broadly you'll recognize the general shape and characteristics of gold standard certification. The key changes in terminology really are preliminary review, that replaces pre-feasibility assessment. We replace registration with design certification, and we replace issuance review with performance review. The reason for those really is, well, there's several reasons. One is to try to make them more intuitive to new users of gold standard. We wanted to reflect that, particularly registration, by calling it design certification, we wanted to reflect that that is actually a certification step and not just an administrative step. We also needed to reflect that in performance review, not everybody will issue something, and so issuance review doesn't really make sense in all cases. So there's a little bit of a tweak to terminology, which I hope everybody can get used to and kind of understand the rationale for pretty quickly. The certification cycle is still based on an ex-ante, ex-post approach. Ex-ante, the steps are very similar. You would submit to gold standard for preliminary review and listing, as you always have done. And there's two pathways there, a kind of simple desk check by gold standard leading to listing, or a more detailed check for certain activity types or high-risk projects or first of their kind projects. But preliminary review really merges pre-feasibility assessment from land use and energy and makes it consistent. You would still appoint a gold standard validation or verification body, so GSVVB is the term there, and they would conduct your validation as they always have done. They submit a report to us, and that's when we conduct a design review and ultimately issue design certification. As I say, that's the new term for registration. One thing we've been able to do there is reduce the what was 6 weeks for registration review down to 4 weeks, and I'll come on to some of those time savings in a future slide. And then ex post, there's two real changes to be aware of. You still require a verification from an auditor and a performance review of 3 weeks from gold standard. But the two main changes there really are, for years where there is no verification, we require you to publish a very short, simple annual report. I know some developers were a little worried about that being a lot of extra work. I would reassure you that we're not expecting volumes of information. It's really a short statement of activity, a page to 2 pages maximum, that just records what's been going on. Have you had any stakeholder inputs? The primary reason for it is that gold standard, it's useful for gold standard to be kept in touch with the project, particularly where there are longer time periods between verifications. So really, it shouldn't increase work very much at all. It's not certified or reviewed. There's no fee attached to the annual report. It's really a way of just us keeping in touch. So hopefully when you get used to that, you'll see that's not an especially onerous addition. Indeed, in land use, it's already a requirement. You don't need to do an annual report on years where you verify. So the verification takes the place of an annual report. So if you're verifying every year, you'll never submit an annual report, and that's totally fine. The other main change is that the certification cycle, or what was the crediting periods, have been adjusted to a 5-year renewal cycle, and that really reflects the Paris Agreement as we come into line to the policy direction of the Paris Agreement. And at certification renewal at year 5, you'll update your baseline, and you will prove to us that you still require gold standard associated finance. So that's where the ongoing financial need comes in. What we're finding is some project types where markets have transformed and those projects are very viable and profitable on their own merits. What that does is divert carbon credit finance to away from projects that are in more dire need. And so we wanted to introduce this kind of ongoing financial need principle that allows projects to exit the gold standard finance mechanism, but not necessarily leave gold standard altogether. You can still remain a gold standard certified project. There are some options which don't require that. So, for example, renewable energy certificate labeling doesn't require proof of ongoing financial need. That's a different market mechanism, and we're not imposing it there. But 5-year renewal is the new system. Unless otherwise stated, the 5-year renewal is once renewal, so a maximum 10-year period. So a bit like the old fixed 10-year crediting cycle. That's the default option, with some kind of slightly lengthier options for different project types found in the activity requirements themselves. I wanted to point a little bit to some of the efficiency gains we've been able to make. I know I'll come on to this in a minute. We are going to require all projects to transition to gold standard for the global goals, unless they're coming to the very end of their crediting cycles. I know there was some concern about that. I'll come on to how we keep that very simple for you. But I would really like to emphasize that what that commitment from you guys does is allow us to manage one standard. And so it's kind of seems counterintuitive to do a lot of work on the standard before looking at efficiency. But if I can manage one standard, what it means is that I can introduce kind of major changes to how we operate and make it easier for everybody, as opposed to looking at all the different versions of our standards and kind of having to do smaller efficiency gains that suit just a smaller pocket of our project developer community. So that managing one standard, I wouldn't underestimate how important that is to be able to give better quality of service, to focus our kind of review attention on one standard rather than several, to be able to introduce efficiency gains, to improve the quality of auditors by training under one standard. That managing one standard is a huge piece, I think, of the strategic puzzle. We've streamlined some of the features in certification itself. I mentioned already that we have reduced what was the registration review period from 6 weeks to 4 weeks. We've also introduced a system where we have one reviewer rather than two of each project as a default position, unless the project is high risk or very large or first of its kind, perhaps conflict zone. Generally, projects will have one reviewer rather than two. And what that really allows us to do is two things. It means that we're more consistent in our feedback to you guys, so you don't get a load of feedback from one reviewer only to get a load of new feedback from the second reviewer. And it allows us to be more flexible with our resource, which is what led us to reducing the review timeline to 4 weeks. So that's something we were excited about. It's really bedding down at the moment, and we're working on various IT systems to help make that as smooth as possible. But I know some of you already fed back that you've benefited from that system, and I'm sure more and more of you will do as you come forward to validation and verification in the future. There's also some new technology on the way as well. I'm sure many of you will be glad to hear, looking at how we bring the workflow off the registry and onto a more adaptable, flexible, easier to use system. I know many people have trouble with the workflow on the market registry, and that's something we're addressing. Again, managing one standard is really critical in that sense. But look out for improvements there. And there's going to be some new tools as well that really help project developers input their data in a more intuitive way. The first there you can see is the gold standard IQ cookstove system. That's going to be a methodological platform for emissions reductions and A-dailies that allows you to input your monitoring data, and it will turn out the calculation for you to save time and effort and mistakes by putting that straight in a PDD or an Excel spreadsheet. It'll improve a lot of consistency there. So that's going to be available to project developers this summer, and we hope to roll out more and more IT platforms for different methodological combinations shortly. And there on the right-hand side, I mentioned the new microsite as well. It'll take a little getting used to. There are a lot of documents, as always, with Gold Standard, but they're more clearly organised now, I feel, and should be more intuitive to find and more intuitive for us to keep you up to date with as well. So quite a number of efficiency gains already, and I'll come on to some of the new ones that we're looking to bring in the coming periods as well. So the $1 million question, some of the key changes. I'm not going to dive into lots of detail at this webinar. As I mentioned at the start, there'll be a more detailed training webinar in the first week of August that you can attend and listen to. If you have specific rule questions, you can also submit those to help@goldstandard.org. So I'm not going to try and address kind of lots of detailed questions on the rules themselves today. But I wanted to give an overview of some of the key changes to the principles of Gold Standard. So principle 1 is where projects have to contribute to climate mitigation or adaptation and SDG impacts. In Gold Standard for the global goals, you are required to contribute to SDG 13, which is climate. That doesn't assume that has to be via carbon credits. You can do that at a simpler level, or you could do that in another way, but carbon credits is one way of doing it. And then you also have to show an impact on 2 SDGs. That's actually no more onerous than it was under version 2.2 or land use, where you had to be positive to 2 MDGs and neutral in one other, but you also had to issue carbon credits. So actually the kind of net effect of that is neutral in terms of a requirement. It's just that we update to the SDGs, obviously. Principle 2, safeguards, they replace the do no harm assessment / sustainability assessment, depending on which route you came through. I'm aware that a lot of people have read the safeguards and at first glance, they appear voluminous and a little bit frightening. There is a lot of information in there. They are lengthy. There's some good reasons for that. For example, it merges together all the versions of Gold Standard. So we have consistent safeguards that are applied by everybody. But what I would say is when you get used to them, what you'll find is 2 things. Most projects won't have more safeguards applicable than they did before. We ran an exercise for cookstove projects and renewable energy projects and found there were no more requirements applicable than there were under 2.2. And we tried to give more clarity. So the length reflects that the requirements are a little bit clearer. A lot of the feedback we get is that in the do no harm assessment, there's a lot of judgment as to whether you've met them or not. There's still some judgment in the safeguarding principles, but we've tried to give more information. So they look long, I think, because there's the safeguards that apply to all project types and because we've tried to give more information. But I'm confident when you guys get used to those safeguards, you'll sort of come around to our way of thinking there. And of course, we'll be on hand to support you with that as well. Not a huge amount has changed in stakeholder engagement requirements. The only major change there, or 2 major changes, one is the consideration of gender issues. So there's a little bit of work to do to think about how to reach out on a gender basis. Hopefully everybody can see why we've done that in the kind of in 2017. Stakeholder consultation should really reflect gender issues better than they have done historically. We're really leading the way there with best practice. So I hope everybody can appreciate the little bit of extra effort that's required and what the benefit of that is to everybody. And the other change there is the need to consider affected stakeholders. So we've always called it a local stakeholder consultation. Now we require you to think a little bit more, who might be affected by the project that's not necessarily local. In many project types, you won't find anybody outside the project boundary that's affected. In some project types, for example, you can imagine a very large agriculture water project. You might want to think about who might be affected in the basin and how those are dealt with. Many projects pick that up in their environmental impact assessment as well. So it's a new requirement. I think, again, hopefully everybody can see the logic of that one as we move to scale. The principle 4 was around the certification cycle I just mentioned, the big changes there being the 5-year renewal and the annual reports. And then principle 5, additionality. So we still require the use of the CDM tools to produce to prove financial additionality where it's required. There's some deemed additionality for certain activity types and scales, very similar to what you saw before. And then we introduced the concept of ongoing financial need, which is where at renewal projects demonstrate to us that finance is still required so that we're not diverting finance that's no longer needed by the project away from other projects. I'm going to come on to additionality in a bit more detail in a minute because we are going to consult upon some of those new requirements shortly as well. Another change which kind of indirectly affects project developers is that we are, for the first time, introducing a framework for our validation and verification bodies. So VVBs is kind of a catch-all term for DOEs or auditors, basically. And so for the first time, we're trying to give more clarity on how a certification decision is made and how we review and approve which auditors are eligible for which certification pathway. That will the aim of that exercise is to improve the quality, to have our auditors make a conscious choice to join the gold standard community as opposed to just being eligible through a proxy accreditation. And so what you should see over time is greater quality from the auditors, which in turn should lead to easier reviews with gold standard. We're also going to use the system to review how we might expand the list of available auditors as well. So we will look to approve a broader base of accreditations other than DOE or ISO 14065 for certain contexts. And so for you as project developers, that should increase the choice you have in the coming years of who can audit your project. The changes really come into effect from the 1st of November. I'll come on to what that means for you in a minute. And so some upcoming milestones. So I mentioned earlier that we are going to require all projects to transition to gold standard for the global goals, except those that have got less than 2 years left in their crediting cycle, where it's just not worth it for the project. You still can if you've got less than 24 months, but you don't have to. So I mentioned the reason for transitioning all projects is really so that we have a consistency of what gold standard means and that we can offer everybody a higher quality service by being consistent. There's also some good technical reasons for it. For example, version 2.2 refers to the Kyoto Protocol and the Millennium Development Goals. If you've just started a fixed 10-year crediting cycle, then you'll still be reporting the Millennium Development Goals in 2027, which is only 3 years from the end of the Sustainable Development Goals period. So it starts to look a bit ridiculous if we don't transition. And by the time you've updated those requirements, you might as well transition to gold standard for the global goals. So again, I know people have been a little nervous of this, but hopefully you can see the rationale for why we've put that forward. I would also say that we're going to make the system for transition as simple as possible. So it doesn't require audit or site visit. It's going to be a process between the project developer and the gold standard, and it will be a submission of gap-based evidence. So not necessarily just demonstrating how you've met every requirement for gold standard for the global goals. We'll look to give you the templates and the checklists to make that as easy as possible. So there shouldn't be a huge amount of documentation exchanged. Gold standard will review it and approve your transition to gold standard for the global goals alongside the verification. So you won't have an extra fee from your auditor or extra delay to your audit process. It will really run alongside in parallel and be decided upon by gold standard directly. And I would say, we're expecting a fairly straightforward transition for, I would say, 90% plus of all projects. We're not expecting that the new requirements will be too onerous for transition projects to meet. So a little bit of effort required, but not a huge amount. Will make that process simple. And I don't think there's a great deal to worry about in terms of meeting the new requirements for existing projects. We're not looking to disrespect existing projects by barring you from the new standard. So the timing for that, so the new standard published on the 10th of July, that's what I just showed you on the microsite. It comes into effect for new projects from the 14th of August. Up until the 1st of November, this is the critical date if you have existing projects. Anything you've submitted to gold standard on or before the 1st of November, be it for PFA, for listing, for if you're in validation or registration review, you can continue to register under version 2.2 or earlier, whichever one you're operating under. So really, up until the 1st of November, if you're an existing project, you really don't have anything to do that was different from before. You can continue to register as previous. If you submitted to us before the 1st of November, then even if your registration takes beyond the 1st of November, that's fine as well. You can finish your registration as long as you're kind of in the process before the 1st of November. If it's a totally new project, like you come in for listing after the 1st of November, then that will be a gold standard for the Global Goals project. So I think we've been fairly kind of generous with the grace period. Like I say, if you're in any kind of process with gold standard where you've submitted to us already, then you can finish your registration under version 2.2 or earlier, whichever one you're using. So really nothing to be concerned with in the immediate next steps. Then in terms of transition, Every project will do that, but you don't have to do it until the next available verification or certification renewal that takes place after the 1st of March 2018. So that doesn't mean you have to transition on the 1st of March. That means if your verification is any time after the 1st of March, that's when we'll do the process. For some of the projects, you might not transition until 2019 if that's what happens to be when your next verification is. And obviously, there's some flexibility, there in the timing. So please do come to us early if you want to try and get the documentation out of the way, even ahead of verification. That's also fine. But really, like I say, the key dates to remember are 1st of November. If you're in process with us before 1st of November, you can complete your registration. Even if it takes beyond 1st of November, there's nothing new for you to do. If you submit to us after the 1st of November, then you're a gold standard for the Global Goals project. And then after the 1st of March, if you're an existing project, not gold standard for the Global Goals, then you transition at the next available verification. Now, I know these are a little slightly fiddly dates to get people's heads around. If you're worried about where your project is or what you should do next, do drop us an email at help@goldstandard and we can straighten that out very quickly for you. But really the message from me is if you're in process right now, you don't need to do anything new until you come to transition after the 1st of March. In terms of eligible auditors, again, there's nothing changing between now and the 1st of November. So if you have an agreement with an auditor, that agreement stands. There's nothing new for you to do. The auditors have been briefed fully on what they can and can't do, and are checking with us in each individual case before they take on new verifications. But generally, there's nothing for you guys to worry about from an auditor's perspective in the short term. After the 1st of November, when the new rules kick in for auditors, that's when we'll publish the eligible list, and that's where you can look to find who's eligible to audit your project. So really with auditors, again, the message, if you're signed up to something with an auditor, nothing changes. Just some keynotes on specific energy points. So I mentioned earlier that Gold Standard is going to label IREX for the first time, which is really exciting. That consultation closed last week, but you can still see the documentation on the website if that's of interest to you. There's also a webinar on the Gold Standard YouTube channel you can listen back to. But basically, the principle is similar to how we label CERs historically, that will apply that kind of high quality best practice to the REX market, starting with IREX labels. You can issue both VERs and IREX from the same project, but not for the same megawatt hour. So we'll be tracking that closely with IREX themselves so that there's no double counting, but you do have the flexibility to do both if you're a renewable energy project, and you can issue IREX, which I think is an exciting development. For everybody else that's not capable of or not eligible to take part in the IREX scheme, what that does mean is that some of the heat, I guess, will come out of the VER market as some of our renewable energy market projects take their place in IREX as well. So it should benefit everybody, but obviously directly to renewable energy projects. I mentioned earlier that certification renewal is mandatory every 5 years. For renewable energy and community service projects, there's 2 renewals, maximum 15 years instead of 1, which is the default and gold standard for the global goals. And community projects don't need to reassess the baseline at the first 5-year period. So we're trying to keep things as simple as possible for things like cook stove and wash projects. You can see all of those details in the activity requirements. We'll also find some new deemed additionality criteria for microscale projects or projects in certain parts of the world. So really, not a huge amount of change in those requirements specific, but there are some stuff that I would say it's worth reading through in those activity requirement documents. I'll circulate the links to those after this webinar. There's some notes on land use projects as well, which I won't delve into here. There's some webinars on Thursday this week. If you're a kind of land use developer and or a kind of joint developer that does both types, please do join those webinars. They'll also be recorded, and we can share some feedback there too. So that's the technical stuff. Just before I wrap up this overview, I wanted to give a little bit of a heads up on what's coming up, which I hope you can all feel excited about and you can sort of see what we're trying to achieve here. There's really 3 pillars for the innovations coming forward. One is that we want to make sure that we future-proof ourselves post-2020, particularly with the Paris Agreement coming into force. We want to further build demand for carbon credits and other uses of emissions reductions in that new marketplace, and some new funders to SD impact. So really trying to build the demand side for Gold Standard. And then lastly, we're highly committed to reducing complexity and cost of certification. And as I say, with one standard, there's a lot of innovation I think we can now go and do. So what's coming up? So future-proofing your projects. We know that the Paris Agreement causes some uncertainty to the voluntary carbon market in that with the NDCs, we might have some double counting going on. We're a little unsure what additionality might mean. We're a little unsure what baselines might mean post-2020. And we have to acknowledge that Gold Standard isn't the organization to directly shape those policy directions. But we do want to influence them, and we want to try and lead best practice. And so you'll see in Q3 this year that we begin some consultations around additionality, around ongoing financial need. We're going to be working on new double counting rules that reflect the status of the nationally determined contributions. We'll be looking at new emission reduction products. So, for example, Scope 3 supply chain reporting that could be used by corporates. Linking with our colleagues at CDP, I think that would open up a huge new avenue of demand for projects. And we'll be exploring emissions reduction statements as well, where carbon credits aren't possible. So looking perhaps at domestic markets where it's not necessarily feasible to issue carbon credits due to double counting. We're also interested, we're in the very early stages here, but if people are interested in any kind of labeling from Gold Standard, for example, in the Australia market or Chinese CERs, that's something we're open to exploring as well. How do we label some of the new market mechanisms coming forward? Is the demand for that? Do project developers want us to do that? That's something we can explore. So we're keen to hear from you if you have views on the future of the carbon markets. We're keen if you have expertise in additionality or double counting. If you have an interest in domestic labeling, there's going to be a series of consultations that kick off this autumn. And if you have, as I say, if you have any specific ideas, then we'd love to hear from you. Do reach out to us. There's some new applications. So in environmental markets, I mentioned already that we're looking at renewable energy certificate labeling. We are looking at results-based finance for other SD metrics like A-dailies and water, where those kind of specialist markets exist. And we're looking at how we might click into things like large impact investment fund portfolios as well, that will use Gold Standard for the global goals as a kind of due diligence M&E system, and that projects could apply to. Some of you might think that sounds a little pie in the sky, but we've had direct conversations with two funds that are very keen and interested to work directly with Gold Standard. So I wouldn't think of that as an abstract concept. I genuinely believe that will come forward in the next 12 months. Corporate reporting is very exciting. We're looking at how we adapt the standard to allow corporates to use it instead of carbon credits, but for their Scope 3 reporting. That again opens up a potential for projects that are within corporate supply chains to be part of that scheme and find finance routes another way. And again, we are in direct arrangements with some corporate funding there to develop those new requirements. So again, not an abstract concept, but one that's going to come forward shortly. And then large-scale climate and development. If you're interested in our city standard, that's come forward, and you can see that on the microsite. It's a slightly longer burn, this, but we are also going to explore how we might certify sustainable landscape programs as well, working with WWF potentially on that one. So again, if you have an interest in landscape certification, then please do reach out to us. And then I'll sign off with some upcoming milestones. So I mentioned that all projects can transition to Gold Standard for the global goals from the 14th of August. But if you're already in process with us, then there's nothing that you need to do before registration. You can just carry on and register as you planned. If you submit to us after the 1st of November, then you're a Gold Standard for the global goals project. Later in October, we're going to be issuing a gender responsive framework. That's going to allow people to quantify and issue gender impact statements. I suspect there's a niche market for that. It might also be a gateway market for certain carbon credit buyers. I know there are government buyers that are tailoring their carbon credit purchases to require more specific metrics on gender. So really looking at that as a kind of gateway thing to access those types of clients that are demanding that new kind of offering. I mentioned that the post-Paris 2020 agenda is moving ahead at Gold Standard. You'll see a series of things from us. I know everybody's been waiting for us to make our moves into what we think best practice looks like. Now that we have our standard in place and the platform for those things to function within, we're going to be working hard on a post-2020 initiative coming forward. This is more for the kind of standards geeks amongst us, but we are going to be applying to ISEAL for membership shortly. For those that don't know, ISEAL is a standards body for standards. So Fairtrade is a member, FSC is a member, amongst others. Really, that's a system of best practice for standard setting and certification. And so that's something that will add a lot of credibility and allow Gold Standard to access new areas of best practice and thinking and partnerships that hopefully all of you guys will benefit from. So looking to apply later on this year or early next year. And then we're looking at new SDG tools and methodologies, working with our partners at the UNFCCC to bring forward SDG quantification tools, not necessarily for the issuance of any type of product, but maybe a kind of SDG compass for agriculture or an SDG compass for cook stoves, for example, that will make everybody's lives easier in terms of reporting. So lots of exciting stuff coming up with SDG tools and methodologies as well. If you have an interest in any of those, then we'd love to hear from you. And that's really it from my side. I hope that's a useful overview of where we've got to. We've had nearly 2.5 years of development, over 30 experts involved in working groups and subgroups, reviewing and deciding upon the standard. We've had a round of early terms of reference for the standard that people could comment on. We've had a 60-day consultation and a 30-day consultation, and now the outreach we have here and the ongoing help desk that we're operating. So it's been a long, inclusive process, I think, that's led to this standard. I hope you all feel some kind of ownership of it and are excited by the prospects coming forward. But from my side, just thank you for participating in the scheme and for being part of those consultations. So that's it. All I wanted to say in terms of a presentation. We've got around 15 minutes left of the hour, but I can run on. That's no problem. To take your questions. I see a few of you have already submitted questions in the question box there, which is great. So I'll work through those first. If you think of something, add it to the questions box, or do email me at help@goldstandard.org and we can pick them up there. So I'll just quickly work through these questions. One from Olivier. Doesn't seem to be impact methodologies for water benefits. It's a good spot, Olivier. Actually, there's an oversight or an error on the microsite, and those methodologies haven't for some reason published, but we're going to address that this week. The two methodologies that we had for wash and drip irrigation will find their place in Gold Standard for the Global Goals. They won't change, so you can still find them on the earlier version of the website, but they've, for some reason, the publication misfired for those two methodologies, so they'll be added this week. Another question here, will existing project on 7-year renewable period have to switch to the 5-year renewable period, and will a 10-year fixed period be able to switch into the 5-year one as well? So the principle there is a sort of hybrid. When you transition to Gold Standard for the Global Goals, you'll get the balance of your crediting period. So we won't immediately switch to 5 years. So if you're 2 years into a 10-year fixed, you'll get 8 years fixed under Gold Standard for the Global Goals upon transition, if that makes sense. If you're a renewal project of 7 years and you're 2 years in, then you'd have the remaining 5 years when you transition. And then at renewal, it'll flip to 5 years. So we won't interrupt any existing crediting period. Basically, we're aware that people have legal arrangements, etc., in place for those. And when you come to renewal, then it'll be a flip over to the 5-year cycle of Gold Standard for the Global Goals. What does it mean by maximum 2 years between listing and design certification? So that's a similar rule to what you'll find in 2.2, that there's a maximum time period between listing as a Gold Standard project and what was registration, now design certification. That's the maximum period that it can take between those two things. And the reason for that is that obviously if it takes a lot longer than that, then some of those assumptions made by stakeholder consultation begin to change, and obviously it needs an update. There's also prior consideration rules and maximum timescales for retroactive projects, and so there's a series of those kind of timeline restrictions that you can find in the principles and requirements, and so do take a look at those. There are, as always, if there's exceptions to those rules that people have good reasons why they couldn't meet that requirement, then it's always possible to reach out to us, and we can discuss and review whether that's possible. Will a preliminary review need to be carried out for all projects? So the simple answer is yes, but it's a yes with a caveat. There's two options with preliminary review. There's a simple desk check, which is more like what we have for the passport in version 2.2. and that leads to listing. And there's a more detailed check for certain project types, like we had in land use, for example, or it might be for a first of its kind project, or where we have a extremely large potential project, for example, we might apply that. Yes, everybody does a preliminary review, but it's very similar to the passport review and listing for most projects that you've seen previously. I would say that if you're used to passing through PFA or listing under 2.2 in a pretty quick way, then you can expect that to continue under gold standard for the global goals. It's really only the exceptions in certain project types that'll go down a more detailed route. So preliminary review is really like the passport review for most projects. From Tanushree, any template for annual reports? Yeah, there's an annual report template actually in the standard. So if you go to the principles and requirements, there's a template section. In fact, I can show you that quickly now. There's a template section where you can download the template. So let me just open the principles and requirements. So let's take a second. So if you scroll down in the principles and requirements under the QA part, you'll see template documents. And then in there, you'll see annual report and grievances. And if you click that button, you'll see the download just occurred. The annual report and grievances template, I would say, is kind of provided as an optional thing if you want to use your own annual report template. So, for example, if you publish something for marketing purposes anyway, then we're totally open to that. We're pretty flexible on the annual report template. But we wanted to weren't sure what to do really to help guide you guys. So feel free to come up with your own annual report templates. That's totally fine as well. What happens to issuances submitted after the 1st of November? So the dates are a little confusing, and I do appreciate that. So if you've got a specific project case, do reach out to us anytime. If you're registered under gold standard already, then nothing changes until you come to the next verification. So issuances submitted after the 1st of November can carry on as normal and will issue as normal. Issuances that take place after the 1st of March 2018 will also continue as normal, but alongside that process, we'll run this kind of parallel process to transition to gold standard for the global goals. And that process will be between the developer and gold standard, not the auditor. So really, for your next issuance, in all cases, there's no change. And then on or after the 1st of March, there'll be this parallel process to transition. So Tanushree, if you've got a particular project concern or a series of project concerns, please do reach out to us. I'm happy to walk you through what happens to those dates. Gender coming in 2017, in fact. So the new gender, there's two parts to our gender initiative. There's some stuff that we've added to the principles and requirements. So for example, we've enhanced the safeguard for gender, and there's some gender requirements in the stakeholder consultation. Those will apply to all new gold standard for the global goals projects that are submitted after the 1st of November. For transition projects, we'd like to see people making an effort, but we recognize that you can't go back and do a consultation. So that won't be a kind of black mark. So the fact that you can't go back and consider gender issues in more detail, we obviously won't make that an issue for transition projects. But those requirements exist for new projects already from the 1st of November. And then in terms of the gender responsive framework, that's where you can quantify gender impacts. That'll be available from October. That's not mandatory, just like A-Dailies isn't mandatory. You can choose to do that if you want to. We're aiming to make that a framework that's broadly applicable across all sectors, with, in some cases, some specific activity guidance. So it's not going to be an activity-specific methodology. You could do gender in a renewable energy context or an agriculture context or any other context that you feel it's appropriate. It's really up to you on that one. There'll be a consultation, incidentally, on the gender responsive framework. So look forward to people's feedback on that. Question from Richard. Good webinar. Thanks, Richard. That's nice. Nice to hear. And yes, we will make the recording available for absent colleagues. If you didn't join at the start, I think there's a few late joiners. I'll just show it again. Gold Standard has a YouTube channel, believe it or not. I only found out about it the other day, actually, but we do have a YouTube channel, and you can see all the uploads from the last week for the different webinars. So hopefully you can see on my screen, there's the renewable energy label, the REX label Q&A. These two are from the webinars we did with the auditors, and the 4 presentations we give to project developers this week will all be uploaded as well. So feel free to listen to any of those, and we'll also publish the schedule of questions with our responses as well, so everybody can read those back too. So thanks, Richard, for that. question there, if we want to transition early, what's the process? So transitioning early is very possible. The process is included. I can show you where to find that. We'll circulate it afterwards. The process is included on the microsite. So if you go to optional requirements, you'll find if you go to principles and requirements, you'll find the transition requirements document there. That explains the process, but we're also going to be working on checklists and templates as well to make that process smoother. So if you're interested in transitioning early, I would say either the best way to get in touch is via your usual contact. That could be me or Neha or Anita, or email us at help@goldstandard.org, and we'll start to reach out to those projects looking to transition early. We do want to try and transition some projects early to get used to the process a little bit as well. So people that are keen to do it early and kind of help us enhance that process, then please do reach out. Question there, written that an annex must be submitted for transition process to the new rules. Is there a template for the annex? There will be. There isn't yet, but there will be shortly. The requirements I just pointed to show what will be in that annex as well, but we want to kind of try and provide that as something that's as simple as possible to fill out. So we'll be working on those annexes, and they'll be released fairly shortly, actually, for you guys to take advantage of. So Claire, if you're interested in that, let's have a call on that. We can discuss it with Neha about how we bring that forward. What's the official date of release for Gold Standard for the global goals? So we published 10th of July. And the reason we did that is we wanted to give people a good few weeks to get used to the new standard and for us to do these kind of webinars. But the official effective date is the 14th of August. That's the date when the requirements come into force, if you like. So in effect, the 10th of July to the 14th of August, you could kind of read as a preview outreach kind of phase, I suppose. In reality, the key date, I think, for new projects, so projects that have never been submitted to Gold Standard, is actually the 1st of November. That's the date from which all new projects will be using Gold Standard for the global goals. For projects that are already in process, as I say, you can finish your registration under previous versions. Anything special for CDM registered projects that are also GS accredited? Not especially, actually. So those will also transition to Gold Standard for the global goals, and we'll look to make that as simple as possible. There's no particular rules for CDM project transitions that I'm aware of. I'll double check with my team and make sure that's captured in the FAQs. But if you're a CDM project, there's nothing particular more that you would need to do than if you're a GS-VER project. Are retroactive projects eligible under GS for Are retroactive projects eligible under GS for GG? In the guidance, it says after 1st of November, it will be against GS for GG. There is a retroactive section to the new requirements, which is very similar to the retroactive dates that you'll find in version 2.2. So if you go to the principles and requirements, you'll find the retroactive dates there. And that's like I say, they're very similar to the retroactive date timelines for version 2.2. So if you're an existing retroactive project, like you registered retroactively under version 2.2, then you can certainly transition to GS for GG. That's totally fine. If you're a project coming in after the 1st of November that's retroactive, then the dates are laid out in the principles and requirements. So for example, the maximum retroactive period is all set down in the new requirements, and they'll be pretty familiar dates. So if you're familiar with the dates from 2.2, the maximum timelines from 2.2, they're very similar. When will the list of approved VVBs available? If we want to transition early and the new rules apply in 2017, will the DOE already be eligible? So up until the 1st of November, all the eligible DOEs are still eligible. So if you take on a DOE before it's the 1st of November, they're still eligible. That's totally fine. The new list of those that have made their application will be made available on the 1st of November. So at the moment, you can use anybody that you've always used. From the 1st of November, there'll be a list of specific auditors that have applied to Gold Standard. There'll be no gap in service, so it'll be the ones that apply for the 1st of November, and all indications are that we don't expect many or any, frankly, dropouts from the existing community. We had 70 auditors come to our VVB requirements training, and a number of people have already confirmed that they intend to make their applications shortly. So there'll be no drop-off in service with DOE availability. But the specific list of what's available after the 1st of November to be commissioned will be published on that date. And there's some flexibility there. So if you are just about to enter a legal agreement on the 1st of November, then obviously we can discuss how to keep that flexible for you guys. But right now, whoever's eligible for your project right now is still eligible. and we'll confirm a specific list for new validations or verifications that take place from after the 1st of November. So there's a specific question about retroactive submission dates there from Claire, which looks like a bit of a contradiction in the requirement. So Claire, let me take that one away. I think that's one that we should respond to kind of formally to everybody to make sure that everybody has a consistent answer to that one. I see your point. I can understand where the kind of confusion comes from there. I think it's probably what Tanushree was getting at in the earlier question as well. So if you'll allow me, I'll copy that question and we'll come back to everybody in the outreach from the webinar to make sure that we're giving you guys a consistent response to that. Is there a template available for the annex? So that's from Richard. So yes, that's what I mentioned to Claire's question. We will provide you with templates for transition. The documents that are required are all noted in the transition requirements, and I'll share that link after the call as well. In the case of an already registered project, first we apply for transition during the next verification. The process is only reviewed by GS and not the DOE. The approval is done, and then they'll apply the new rules for GG subsequent verification. Is that correct? Yeah, that's exactly correct, Claire. So what we'll do is for the next issuance that takes place after the 1st of March 2018, we'll jointly review with you the transition requirements and approve you to be transitioned to the GS for the global goals. But that won't affect the verification you're doing or the new issuance that you're about to undertake. The new requirements then kick in after that date. And there'll be a plan that we agree with you on if there's any changes to monitoring, etc., for future verifications. But the principle we're really applying here is to minimize those. We don't want you guys having to do more monitoring than you're doing now. So really, it'll be a case of converting things like your MDG contributions to the SDGs. Are there any safeguards that we've introduced that you could do something about, for example, that without being too onerous, that might be worth picking up? But the general principle will be to try and minimize the amount of added monitoring that comes after transition. The structure of gold standard for the global goals, the kind of elements of it like safeguards and SDG contributions are very similar to earlier versions of gold standard. So like I say, the principle is really to try and minimize the amount of extra monitoring that you guys have to do. So yep, Tanushree, very happy to discuss bilaterally the projects that you want to discuss. And as I say to everybody, I know it's a little bit concerning when new standards come out, but rest assured we're happy to discuss with each and every one of you, what dates work for you. If there's information that's going to take you a little longer to get together, we recognize that asking everybody to transition is something that we've not done before with earlier versions, but I hope you can see the benefit of doing it. And we recognize for our part that there's benefits to us for everybody transitioning, and we really want to help you guys through that process. If our project is deemed additional via the new rules, does it mean we don't need to demonstrate financial additionality and ongoing financial need? So you won't need, if you're deemed additional, you won't need to demonstrate financial additionality, that's for sure. In some cases, that also takes care of ongoing financial needs. So for example, in longer term forestry projects, we won't be asking people to do that. Generally, ongoing financial need is on top of financial additionality. So you would normally have to prove that as well, but there are exceptions for certain project types, which you can find in the activity requirements. I would stress, I know ongoing financial need is a kind of a new concept in the market. What we mean by that is not that you are no longer additional. Additionality really only happens once, and it's whether or not you went ahead with the project. It's really to try and take care of those project types and locations where markets just mean that they just don't need the finance anymore. And what we're seeing is there are certain project types in certain countries that sweep up a lot of the carbon credit market without really making any difference anymore. And so that's what we really want to make sure is taken care of. Now, we also want to protect those projects because they haven't done anything wrong. They're following the rules. So we're trying to give off-ramps like, for example, labeled IREX or other mechanisms where they can continue with gold standard. But we really want to use that mechanism to take the heat out of the market where project types are just turned and they're just sustainable and profitable on their own merits. Is it possible to monitor and certify GS contributions to more than 3 SDGs? Absolutely. Yeah, we would love to see you do as many as you possibly can, but 3 is the minimum. So, and 1 has to be SDG 13. That's the climate security part of the mission. But if you want to do 4, 5, 7, 10, 15, that's totally up to you, and we'll support that if you do want to do it. One thing we are going to try and introduce, as I said, is SDG reporting tools, and we've got an early example of that coming forward with Cookstove shortly. They're not going to be mandatory. They're totally up to you if you want to apply them. But the idea of those tools will be to make it easy to monitor multiple SDGs beyond 3. So, we know, for example, that an agriculture project might make 7 or 8 SDG contributions, but the cost of doing that monitoring puts people off. They actually don't use gold standard for that purpose because it's extra effort on your part. So we want to try and take that extra effort away and make it so that we celebrate as many SDG contributions for as many projects as possible. That'll take a little time. There's a lot of work to do with new tools on that, but that's really the aim here, is to make it more compelling to do more SDG contributions than it was under version 2.2, where frankly you're almost better off in some occasions just doing the minimum amount, just because of the effort for monitoring and assessment. So those tools are coming forward. If you have your own tools, they can be used as well, and very excited to see people go beyond the mandatory 3, that's for sure. And when will the GS SDG tool be available? So the Cookstove SDG tool is part of that Cookstove IQ I mentioned, where people will submit their emissions reduction calculations that way. We've also included in there a kind of a new concept, which is an SDG reporting section to that, which is the kind of first of its kind. We are going to be developing more and more sophisticated versions of those for different project types. We're really excited about that, actually. I actually honestly think there'll be a lot of demand, if not even more demand in a way, I think, than some of the kind of results-based finance markets. I can imagine corporates very much looking to fund projects that are reporting that way. But the Cookstove IQ tool specifically is going to be available in August. And it'll be available to all Cookstove users. So if you're a CDM methodology user, you can use it. If you're a GSVER methodology user, you can use it. And if you want to use it for SDGs, then it's there for that as well. So I don't have the exact date of launch with me, actually, Claire, but it'll be somewhere around late August that it'll be available to everybody to use. Good. Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of the submitted questions. There's some really astute ones in there, guys, and I can sort of feel the somewhat nervousness around transition and new requirements and getting used to them, and I can also feel some excitement about some of the new opportunities, which is, frankly, how we feel at Gold Standard as well. There's a lot of work to do to get the standard operating smoothly. I really hope you can see that the reason for unifying it means that we can offer you guys a higher quality service in the short term, and in the longer term, mid-term, longer term, come up with more and more efficiencies that benefit everybody. So really, I don't want anybody to think we've taken our eye off the ball with the introduction of the global goals. It's really, actually, we're trying to get our eye on one ball. if I want to extend that metaphor, we're really trying to look at one ball rather than several balls, and that will allow us to be a better service provider to you all. So there's no further questions written. We'll call the webinar concluded there. It is recorded. It will be circulated, as I mentioned. And I would urge you, if you do have questions, please do reach out to us at help@goldstandard.org. I'm owen.hewlett@goldstandard.org. I'm happy to field questions there too. Many of you know a Nehar or Abhishek or Vikash. That's also another avenue that you can submit to. Very much look forward to hearing from you all about your projects and working with you on the transitions. Thank you, everybody. We'll call it there. Thank you so much for joining, and I'm really excited to work with you all in the coming months and years. Look out for the consultations that are coming forward in Q3 as well. I'd love you all to participate in some of those if you have interest in any of those areas. Then I'd love to hear from you on those. Thank you so much, everybody.